He was worth over $1 billion. He threw the most famous parties on the planet. The biggest names in music, film, and fashion all wanted to be in his circle. Sean Combs didn't just live the good life. He was the good life. But then one morning, the FBI kicked down his door. His sons watched in tears. His empire collapsed overnight. And the world that had spent 30 years celebrating this man suddenly had one question that nobody could stop asking. How did nobody see this coming? Stay with me, because the answer will shock you. Welcome to Stardom Gossip, where no celebrity story ever gets told halfway. If you are new here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a thing. And if today's story hits you the way I think it is going to, share it with somebody. They will thank you for it. Now let's get into it. Before we talk about the fall, we have to talk about the rise. Because without understanding how high Sean Combs climbed, you will never fully understand how devastating it was when it all came crashing down. November 4th, 1969. Harlem, New York City. One of the most electric, most creative, most unapologetically alive places on the face of this earth. This is where Sean John Combs came into the world. But the story did not stay in Harlem for long. His mother, a woman of extraordinary strength and quiet sacrifice, moved the family to Mount Vernon, New York, determined to give her son something better than what the streets of the city were offering. She raised him largely alone. Because Sean lost his father at the young age of 2. CNN gone before the boy was old enough to form a memory of him. Gone before he could teach his son how to tie his shoes or throw a ball or navigate the complicated, unforgiving world that was waiting outside their front door. Most children who grow up without a father, without money, without the safety net that so many people take for granted, most of them carry that absence like a wound. Something missing, something that never quite heals. But Sean Combs carried it differently. He carried it like fuel, like a fire that needed no permission to burn, like a hunger that no amount of comfort was ever going to fully satisfy. From the time he was old enough to understand what ambition meant, Sean Combs wanted more. Not just more money, more everything, more influence, more power, more presence in the world. He wanted to be felt. He wanted to matter. And from a very early age, it was clear that nobody and nothing was going to stop him from getting exactly that. He graduated high school and enrolled at Howard University in Washington, D.C., one of the most prestigious historically black universities in America. Business was his major. And even then, even as a college student sitting in lecture halls and walking across campus, his mind was somewhere else entirely. It was in the music. It was in the industry. It was in the boardrooms and the studios and the backstage corridors of a world he had not yet entered but could already see so clearly in his mind that it felt like a memory rather than a dream. So he made his move. He became an intern at Uptown Records in the early 1990s. Unpaid, unproven, unknown, but so relentlessly driven, so sharp, so instinctively gifted at understanding what people wanted to hear and feel and experience, that he quickly rose through the ranks. NBC News, he dropped out of college entirely. Because college could wait. The moment could not. And Sean Combs was not the kind of man who let moments pass him by. He was instrumental in launching the careers of artists such as Mary J. Blige and Jodeci. Hello Magazine, two names that would go on to define entire chapters of R&B history. And he did it before he was even 30 years old. Before he had his own label. Before he had his own name on a record. He did it as the man behind the curtain, the one pulling strings that nobody else could even see, with a vision so clear and so precise that the artists he touched seemed to transform the moment he put his hands on their careers. But working for someone else was never going to be enough for Sean Combs. It was never the destination. It was always just the education. And by 1993, the education was complete. In 1993, after parting ways with Uptown, he founded Bad Boy Records, launching the careers of Mary J. Blige, Faith Evans, and the notorious B.I.G. TMZ Bad Boy Records. A name that became synonymous with an era. A name that teenagers spray painted on their notebooks and adults argued about at barbershops and radio stations played until the speakers crackled. Bad Boy was not just a record label. It was a sound, a feeling, a a whole aesthetic that grabbed the culture by the collar and refused to let go. And at the center of all of it was Sean Combs, producing, directing, orchestrating, building something that nobody had quite built before in quite the same way. He was not just signing artists. He was creating stars. He was not just releasing music. He was manufacturing moments, cultural touchstones, songs that people would hear 20 years later and immediately be transported back to exactly where they were the first time they heard them. The success of Biggie's 1994 album Ready to Die and Diddy's own debut No Way Out in 1997 catapulted him into superstardom. TMZ No Way Out, an album that went 7 times platinum, an album that won him a Grammy, an album anchored by a song called I'll Be Missing You, a tribute to his fallen friend and artist the Notorious B.I.G. That topped charts around the entire world and became one of the most emotionally devastating and commercially successful songs of an entire generation. Sean Combs was not just behind the scenes anymore. He was the scene. He was the moment. He was the name on everybody's lips and the face on every television screen. And then, just when the world thought it understood what Sean Combs was capable of, he showed them it was only the beginning, because music was just chapter 1. In 1998, he launched Sean John, a clothing line that quickly gained traction and dominated urban style. The Washington Post, not a vanity project. Not a celebrity side hustle slapped together to capitalize on his fame. A real fashion brand. A brand that, as recently as 2016, made $450 million in annual sales. Variety $450 million. From a clothing line built by a boy from Harlem who started as an unpaid intern less than a decade earlier. Sean John won the CFDA Award for Menswear Designer of the Year in 2004, one of fashion's most prestigious honors, beating out designers who had spent their entire careers in the industry to earn the recognition that Diddy picked up almost as a side note to everything else he was already doing. Then came the vodka. His partnership with Diageo, which began in 2007, and his involvement with the Ciroc Vodka brand helped skyrocket its popularity. His partnership was structured in such a way that he earned a significant share of the brand's profits, leading to annual earnings of $90 million at its peak. The Washington Post $90 million. Every year. From vodka alone. Think about that. While other artists were counting album sales and touring revenue, Diddy had structured a deal so smart, so forward-thinking, so completely ahead of its time that it became a blueprint that every celebrity entrepreneur who came after him studied and tried to replicate. In 2013, Diddy co-founded Revolt TV, a music-oriented television network. TMZ, his own network, his own platform, his own channel to control his own narrative and the narrative of an entire culture. They say the truth has a way of surviving, no matter how deep you bury it. No matter how much money you throw on top of it. No matter how many lawyers, how many settlements, how many carefully worded statements you put between yourself and the world. The truth just waits. Patient, quiet, absolutely certain that its moment will come. And for Sean Combs, that moment arrived in November 2023. And when it did not come quietly. Her name was Cassandra Ventura, a singer, a model, a woman who had spent years at the center of Diddy's world. His artist, his girlfriend, his possession in ways that the world was only just beginning to understand. She was 19 years old when they met. He was 37. TMZ 19. Think about that. A teenager stepping into the orbit of one of the most powerful men in the entertainment industry. A man who controlled her record deal, her career, her income, her access to the world she had worked so hard to enter. A man who, according to what she would later tell the world, used every single one of those things as weapons. On November 16, 2023, Cassie Ventura filed a lawsuit against Sean Combs accusing him of rape, sex trafficking, and physical abuse. CNN, not vague allegations. Not whispered accusations. A federal lawsuit, filed in black and white, in the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York, with her name on it, with her face attached to it. In a world where powerful men had spent decades making women afraid to speak, Cassie Ventura put her name on that document and told the world exactly what she said had happened to her. The allegations were devastating. She alleged that Combs lured her into an ostentatious, fast-paced and drug-fueled lifestyle and into a romantic relationship with him, her boss, one of the most powerful men in the entertainment industry. Variety, she said the abuse began almost immediately, that he controlled every aspect of her personal and professional life, that he plied her with drugs and alcohol, that he beat her, that he punched her, kicked her, stomped on her, that he forced her into sexual acts that she did not consent to and filmed them, and that in 2018, when she finally tried to leave him for good, he forced his way into her apartment and raped her. Yahoo! The world went completely still, because this was not a rumor. This was not a tabloid story built on anonymous sources and speculation. This was a woman standing in the full light of public scrutiny and saying these things happened to me. In this man's world, behind those velvet ropes, inside those mansions, at those legendary parties that the rest of the world had spent decades envying from the outside. Diddy's legal team moved fast, immediately calling the allegations offensive and outrageous, vehemently denying everything. His attorney stated that a decision to settle a lawsuit, especially in 2023, was in no way an admission of wrongdoing. Hello Magazine, and settle they did. Just one day after the lawsuit was filed, Combs and Ventura reached a settlement. Yahoo! One day. The speed of that settlement raised more eyebrows than almost anything else that followed. Because when a man worth hundreds of millions of dollars settles a lawsuit of that magnitude in less than 24 hours, the world starts asking questions that no amount of money can silence. And the questions were just getting started. Because Cassie was not alone. Not even close. In the weeks and months that followed her lawsuit, the floodgates opened. Between November and December 2023 alone, 4 women came forward accusing Combs of sexual misconduct. CNN, then more and more. Each new name, each new lawsuit, each new set of allegations adding another layer to a picture that was becoming impossible to look away from. A music producer named Rodney Jones sued him. A former member of Donity Kane came forward. Women who had been silent for years, some for decades, suddenly finding the courage that Cassie's lawsuit had given them. The walls that Sean Combs had spent 30 years and hundreds of millions of dollars building around himself were cracking. Visibly, publicly, irreversibly. And then came the video. On May 17, 2024, CNN released surveillance footage of Combs physically assaulting Ventura at the Intercontinental Hotel in Century City, Los Angeles. The incident had occurred on March 5, 2016. CNN 8 years earlier, caught on a hotel security camera that someone had hoped would never see the light of day. But there it was, in crystal clear footage that left absolutely no room for interpretation, no space for denial, no possibility of a carefully worded statement making what everyone was seeing with their own eyes disappear. The world watched it in silence, and then in outrage. 2 days after the footage was released, Combs posted a video apology on Instagram stating he was truly sorry and that his actions were inexcusable. He said he was disgusted then when he did it and disgusted now. NPR, the apology landed with a thud. Because the same man who had spent months vehemently denying that any abuse had taken place was now on camera apologizing for behavior that he had previously called offensive lies. The contradiction was not lost on anyone. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, something much larger was already in motion. On March 25, 2024, Department of Homeland Security agents conducted raids on Combs' multimillion-dollar mansion in Los Angeles and his Miami waterfront home. Super money, not a quiet knock on the door. Not a polite invitation to answer some questions. Federal agents, in full force, descending on 2 of the most expensive properties in America simultaneously. The images spread across the internet within minutes. Heavily armed officers. Combs' sons seen with their hands above their heads. The empire that had taken 30 years to build being searched floor by floor, room by room, corner by corner. What they found inside those walls told its own story. Agents seized guns, electronics that the indictment claimed held evidence of recorded encounters, and supplies including narcotics and more than 1,000 bottles of baby oil and lubricant. Fandom wire, 1,000 bottles. That detail alone became one of the most discussed and most disturbing pieces of information to emerge from the entire investigation. because it spoke not of a single incident or a momentary lapse in judgment. It spoke of a system, pattern, something that had been happening repeatedly, deliberately, and for a very long time. The net was closing, and Sean Combs knew it. He flew to New York and had been living at the Park Hyatt Hotel on West 57th Street for several weeks, on the advice of his lawyer, when federal agents arrested him on the evening of September 16, 2024. He was caught off guard by the apprehension. Parade the man who had once moved through New York City like he owned it, because in many ways he did, was taken into custody in a hotel lobby. Not at a red carpet, not at an award show, not at one of his legendary parties surrounded by the most famous people on the planet. In a hotel lobby, alone. The grandeur completely stripped away. He was charged in a 3-count indictment with racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking, and transportation to engage in prostitution. The indictment alleged that between 2008 and the present, Combs had abused, threatened, and coerced women and others, and led a racketeering conspiracy that engaged in sex trafficking, forced labor, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and obstruction of justice. Hollywood life, racketeering, sex trafficking, kidnapping, arson, obstruction of justice. These were not the words of a civil lawsuit filed by a single accuser seeking damages. These were federal criminal charges, brought by the United States government, against one of the most powerful men hip-hop had ever produced. And when Sean Combs stood before a judge and entered his plea, he pleaded not guilty to all charges. The judge denied bail. He was ordered held in federal custody. The man who had thrown the most extravagant parties in America. The man who had built an empire worth nearly $1 billion. The man whose name had been synonymous with success, with power, with the absolute pinnacle of what ambition could achieve in this world, was going to jail. On July 2, 2025, a jury found Combs not guilty of racketeering conspiracy and sex trafficking but guilty on 2 counts of transportation for the purposes of prostitution. On October 3, 2025, Judge Arun Subramanian sentenced Combs to 4 years and 2 months in prison, a $500,000 fine, and 5 years of supervised release. For years. For a man who had spent 30 of them at the very top of the world. And as the gavel came down in that courtroom, every award he had ever won, every key to every city he had ever received, every honorary doctorate, every standing ovation, every moment of celebration that the world had given him over 3 decades, meant absolutely nothing. The empire was gone. The legacy was shattered. And the velvet ropes that had once kept the world out had in the end kept the truth in, until it couldn't anymore. October 3, 2025. Manhattan Federal Court. New York City. The same city that had watched Sean Combs build his empire from the ground up. The same streets he had walked as a hungry, ambitious young man with nothing but a dream and a fire that refused to go out. The same courtrooms that had once seemed like they existed in a completely different world from the one Sean Combs inhabited. He was back, but not the way anyone who had cheered for him in the 90s could have ever imagined. The courtroom was packed. The media was everywhere. Outside the building, cameras lined the streets the way they used to line the red carpets that Sean Combs had once walked with his head high and his chest out, and the whole world watching in admiration. But this time the cameras were not there to celebrate him. They were there to document the end. His children were present. They stood before the judge and made a tearful plea on their father's behalf. His son Quincy Brown told the court that his father was transformed and would not jeopardize his freedom again. Justin Combs told the judge that his father was his superhero and asked for a second chance. Christian Combs, who said he most resembled his father in mannerisms, shared that his whole life he had studied his dad up and down. Upper Michigan source 3 sons, standing in a federal courtroom, trying to save their father with the only weapons they had left, their love and their words. There was not a dry eye in that room as those boys spoke. Because whatever Sean Combs had done, whatever darkness had existed behind those closed doors and velvet ropes, those children were innocent. And their pain was real. And it was visible. And it was devastating. His defense team played an 11-minute video tribute in court painting Combs as a loving father and an inspiration to many. At one point during the video, Combs put a hand on his face and began to cry. Upper Michigan source: the man who had projected nothing but strength and power and invincibility for 30 years. The man who had built an entire persona around being untouchable. Sitting in a wooden chair in a federal courtroom with his hand over his face. Crying. Before sentencing, Combs had written a letter to the court appealing for leniency. In it he wrote, "I lost my way. I have been humbled and broken to my core. Variety humbled and broken to my core." Words that would have been completely unimaginable coming from the man who had stood at the top of the world for so long. But there they were. In his own handwriting. Submitted to a federal judge as a plea for mercy from a man who had spent decades making others feel like mercy was his to give or withhold. In his final word before sentencing, Combs told the judge his years of behavior were disgusting and shameful and apologized to the people he had hurt physically and mentally. NBC News: disgusting. Shameful. His words. Not the words of his accusers. Not the language of the prosecution. His own words about his own actions standing in the room where his fate was about to be decided. And then the judge spoke. Judge Arun Subramanian told Sean Combs that his work history, impact on the black community and entrepreneurship were celebrated and iconic. That his success was especially impressive given the early violent death of his father and the trauma that must have left. TMZ: the judge acknowledged the empire. The judge acknowledged the legacy. The judge acknowledged the boy from Harlem who had climbed further and faster than almost anyone in the history of American entertainment. And then he sentenced him anyway. Judge Subramanian said the charges warranted a substantial sentence to send a message to abusers and victims alike that exploitation and violence against women is met with real accountability. The Washington Post: and then before announcing the sentence, he said something that silenced the entire courtroom. He looked toward the survivors and said, "To Ms. Ventura and the other brave survivors that came forward, I want to say first, we heard you." The Washington Post. We heard you. 3 words. Addressed to the women who had spent years being silenced, dismissed, discredited, intimidated and buried under the weight of one man's power and money and influence. 3 words that carried the full weight of everything they had been through. Everything it had cost them to speak. Everything they had risked to make sure the truth finally saw the light. Sean Combs was sentenced to 4 years and 2 months in federal prison and fined $500,000 with 5 years of supervised release to follow. The judge stated it was necessary to deter abuse of power, money, and influence. Variety. Combs showed no visible change of emotion as he learned his sentence. Sitting in his chair and looking straight ahead as the judge spoke. He remained subdued and appeared dejected with none of the enthusiasm and smiles that had accompanied his interactions with his lawyers and family earlier in the day. NBC News: the smile that had graced 1,000 magazine covers. The confidence that had filled every room he had ever walked into. Gone. Replaced by something quieter. Something smaller. Something that looked remarkably like a man finally confronting the full weight of what he had done. The world reacted immediately. And it reacted loudly. Singer Aubrey O'Day, formerly of Donity Kane, one of the groups Combs had created, watched the verdict come in and said it made her physically ill. Hello Magazine: a woman who had been in his world, who had seen things from the inside that the rest of the world only ever glimpsed from the outside. Physically ill. That was her reaction. Grammy-nominated singer Kesha posted in solidarity with Cassie Ventura saying, "Cassie, I believe you. I love you. Your strength is a beacon for every survivor." Hello Magazine: words of solidarity from one woman in the music industry to another. A reminder that behind every lawsuit, behind every legal filing, behind every piece of courtroom testimony, there were real human beings who had carried real wounds for real years and deserved to be seen and believed and honored for their courage. Rapper 50 Cent, who had been one of Combs' most vocal critics for over 2 decades, penned a letter to the judge ahead of sentencing saying, "I have had an ongoing dispute with Puffy for over 20 years. He is very dangerous. Multiple times I have feared for my life. CNN: 20 years of saying something was wrong. 20 years of being dismissed as a rival with a grudge. And in the end, the federal government of the United States of America agreed with him. But perhaps the most powerful voice in that entire courtroom was not the judge, was not the defense, was not the prosecution, was not the celebrities chiming in from the outside. It was the voice of a survivor who filed a statement that became one of the most shared and most discussed pieces of writing to emerge from the entire trial. She wrote, "I do this not just for myself but for every mother, father, child, grandparent, sister, brother, boyfriend, husband, wife, friend, artist, intern, employee, and assistant who sacrificed for a man who only abused them in return. This issue is not only about violence but also secrecy. Many of us were abused precisely because Mr. Combs wanted us to hold his secrets to maintain his reputation. The abuse was deliberate. The control was relentless. The damage is lasting. The abuse was deliberate. The control was relentless. The damage is lasting." Read those words again, slowly, because those are not the words of a legal document. Those are the words of a human being describing what it felt like to exist inside the empire that the rest of the world had spent 30 years admiring from the outside. Those words are the other side of every glamorous photograph, the shadow behind every legendary party, the truth that was always there, always waiting, always surviving, long before the world was finally ready to hear it. Outside the courthouse, the internet was on fire. Throughout the trial and after the verdict, public opinion acted as a pendulum. NPR, some people celebrated. Some people mourned. Some people argued that the man who had done so much for black music, black culture, and black entrepreneurship deserved more mercy than the court had shown him. Others said 4 years was nowhere near enough for what had been described in that courtroom over 7 weeks of testimony. A third opinion circulated that the trial itself was unfair and unjust, with some believing the accusations against Combs were false and simply a ploy to bring a strong black man down. NPR, the internet argued. The internet always argues. But beneath all the noise, beneath all the takes and the counter-takes and the memes and the trolling, there was a truth that no amount of online debate could erase. Women had come forward. They had told their stories. A jury had listened. A judge had ruled. And the man who had built an empire on the idea that he was untouchable had been touched. Firmly, finally, and irrevocably. A Netflix documentary series titled Sean Combs. The Reckoning was released in the aftermath of the trial, adding yet another chapter to a story that the world clearly could not stop consuming. Variety, because that is what happens when something this large falls. The world needs to process it, over and over again, from every angle, through every lens. Because when an empire this big collapses, it does not just affect the man at the center of it. It sends shockwaves through an entire industry, through an entire culture, through every person who had ever looked at Sean Combs and seen a blueprint for what success could look like. His songs will continue to be played at parties for a long time to come. But now they will sound different, not like before. WDBJ, that is perhaps the most honest summary of what the Diddy story ultimately means. The music does not disappear. The legacy does not simply vanish. But it is permanently altered, permanently complicated, permanently shadowed by everything that was hiding inside it all along. Sean Combs, born November 4th, 1969, Harlem, New York. The boy who came from nothing and built everything. The man who stood at the top of the world for 30 years and made the whole world look up at him in awe. Now serving 4 years and 2 months in a federal prison. His empire dismantled. His reputation destroyed. His name permanently attached to a story that no amount of platinum records or white parties or Forbes list appearances can ever fully separate it from. The prosecutor said it best when she stood in that courtroom and told the judge something that cut straight through all the complexity, all the legacy, all the decades of admiration and achievement and cultural impact, down to the simplest and most devastating truth at the center of this entire story. She said he didn't need the money. His currency was control. NBC News. Control. That was always what it was really about. Not the music. Not the fashion. Not the vodka or the television network or the legendary parties. Control. Over careers. Over bodies. Over voices. Over the truth itself. For 30 years, Sean Combs controlled the narrative of who he was and what his empire meant. And for 30 years, the world accepted that narrative because the alternative was too uncomfortable, too complicated, too threatening to the story it wanted to believe. Until it wasn't anymore. Until the whispers became voices. And the voices became lawsuits. And the lawsuits became federal charges. And the federal charges became a verdict. And the verdict became a sentence. And the sentence became 4 years in a federal prison for the man who once stood at the very top of the entertainment world and dared anyone to knock him down. This has been the Diddy story, told in full, told honestly, told the way it deserves to be told, with respect for the survivors who had the courage to speak, and with the honesty that a story this important demands. If this documentary moved you, if it made you feel something, leave a comment below. Tell me your thoughts. Tell me where in the world you are watching from. Share this video with somebody who needs to see it. And subscribe to Stardom Gossip, because this is exactly the kind of storytelling we do here. Every single time. No celebrity story told halfway. Ever.